Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our Total Wellness Tuesday episode here on the Cabral Concept. Excited to get into this somewhat controversial topic of how dangerous gluten is and the real reason why gluten is not great for your overall health. So there's lots of people out there who, of course, have already gone gluten-free, and maybe they've seen benefits, maybe they haven't, but there's still many more skeptics out there saying that people have been eating wheat for 10,000 years and there hasn't been a lot of issues or repercussions because of it. It's only people with celiac disease that should really be worried about it, and so on and so forth. What I'd like to do today, though, is start to look at this from a different perspective, because a lot of people, when they eat wheat-based products, they don't get any gas, they don't get any bloating, they don't feel any issues with it in particular, so they believe that it's healthy for them, that it's totally fine, that it's no big deal for themselves or their children. I just want to share with you a different perspective, because there's more than one way to look at the food that we're eating. So a lot of people, when they talk about, oh, this food does or does not give me bloating. So for example, you could say dairy, you could say gluten, you could say eggs, you could say whatever it is that you want. Okay, let's talk about gluten for a moment. If you don't get bloating or gas or distension or loose stool or anything like that, or hives, right? You might say, I don't have any sensitivities. I don't have any allergies to gluten. And gluten, for those that are new to this, would be inside of a protein, which we'll talk about in a moment, inside of wheat, mainly wheat-based products, that is more gelatinous, that it's a little bit gummy, that there's a protein there. We'll get into that in a moment in terms of gliadin and gluten. But what I want to share with you is this, is that just because you don't have the reaction of bloating or gas or some type of sensitivity in that way when you eat the food within a half hour or hours does not mean that it's not a sensitivity. So I want to kind of back this up for any food. That's called an IgE or even an IgA sensitivity if you have an immediate reaction to it. So I always say like IgE, immediate. If you want to think of it that way, it's much easier. So people know it better from that perspective. And you might cause hives, or it might cause itchiness or scratchiness in the throat or runny nose or runny eyes or bloating in the stomach, something like that when eaten immediately or within a couple hours. Now, that could be an IgE, IgA sensitivity. There can also simply be a digestive sensitivity. So a digestive sensitivity is you eat a food, well, all of a sudden you get a bloated stomach. That could simply be low stomach acid, not enough proper enzymes, you're not chewing enough in your mouth, could be H. pylori in the stomach. Could even be a histamine reaction, right? So those are fine to look at it. And that's definitely, those are real reactions. And of course, if you eat a food and any of those things happen, it's definitely a food sensitivity and potentially even a food allergy. So that matters. I'm going to try to link up below the difference between a food sensitivity and a food allergy. So if you go to stephencabral.com/1908 is today's show, stephencabral.com/1908. I've got a lot of research to link up for you here today as well. You want to click that. But here's what I also want to share with you. There are other food sensitivities that are called IgG, okay, and even IgM. IgM is kind of an intermediary step before an IgG, which is more of a latent-based step. If an IgM sensitivity occurs for long enough, it's typically going to become an IgG sensitivity. But these are later. These are many hours to typically 24 to 72 hours later. That means when you eat the gluten or eggs or kidney beans or almonds, it honestly does not matter, whatever your food sensitivity is, you can actually get the brain fog, the fatigue, the gas, the bloating, because we're talking about in the intestines, the autoimmune issues, meaning the joint pain, the thyroid issues, the thyroid inflammation. So all of these things can happen a day, 2 or 3 days later, and that's called an IgG sensitivity. Now, I'm not going to get deep into that today. I'll link up that show today at stephencabral.com/1908, and also how you can do a food sensitivity test to see if you have any of those or your children do, and you can do that right at home. But what I want to share with you is this, is that if you right now, you have any symptoms, so if you have any symptoms right now of bloating or gas, not necessarily belching, which is more of a stomach acid issue, but if you have any abdominal pain or IBS or bloating, as I said, or gas, or you get brain fog, or you have joint pain or muscle pain or skin rashes or headaches or brain fog, or overall fatigue, what I want to share with you is that it is possible that if you're eating a fair amount of gluten in your diet or you're sensitive to gluten, that this could be because of a reaction that's happening in your intestines. And that's what I want to talk about here today. It is an actual protein called zonulin. Zonulin is a protein that regulates the permeability of the gut. So if you've never heard about intestinal permeability before, I would love to just give you a quick recap right now, but also I will tune you back into previous shows on that. So if we use my buddy here, Walter, then you're looking at his digestive tract, right? So what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at the stomach, which is actually a little bit more of a kidney bean shape than this model is projecting here. But then it leads into the small intestine, which is this peach-colored material, plastic here, and then it leads into your large intestine. All right. Well, inside of mainly the small intestine here can be a protein molecule, as I said, called zonulin. And zonulin is going to regulate how much these intestinal lumen, okay, these tight junctions in between the intestine are open. Why does that matter? Well, we want them ideally tight because that means the bacteria and the yeast and the protein molecules, all of those things stay inside your intestines. Now, why is this important? Because believe it or not, this tube that runs from our mouth all the way out through the anus is about 28 feet long. And when we look at that, we have to understand is it's actually the outside of our body. It runs through our body, but it's totally enclosed. And it's only supposed to allow all of the good nutrients into the body. So when your body breaks down proteins to amino acids and fats to individual fatty acids, to carbohydrates down to single sugars, glucose-based molecules, okay? Those are then allowed to come in through that gut wall right to the bloodstream because the bloodstream is right next to it. Lymphatic system, your immune system, the blood is right there. Then it can be filtered by the liver. It can be processed and taken to other parts of the body. So that's how it's supposed to work. You are not supposed to have openings in those intestinal tight junctions that then allow food particles, heavy metals, bacteria, protein, and much more to seep into the bloodstream. Why? Because when that happens, we get an immune-based reaction, which causes inflammation. So when you have an immune reaction, you get inflammation. If you have an infection in your nasal passages, your sinus passages, you get inflammation in your sinuses because immune cells are fighting some type of viral or bacterial infection there. Same with your throat. Same if you get an injury to one of your muscles, it becomes inflamed, right? Because there's an immune reaction happening. So the immune reaction is not bad. It's not bad. That's what your body's supposed to do. We like to call it, well, autoimmune. Yes, autoimmune dis-ease of the body is a real thing. But there's a root cause to autoimmune issues. And a big part of it, we found now about 90% of people with autoimmune issues have what we just described, which is leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability. Same exact thing. Increased intestinal permeability is more of a medical name for it, and leaky gut is more of the layman name for it, which is describing exactly what it is. You are literally leaking protein and bacteria, et cetera, lipopolysaccharides from your gut into your bloodstream that were never meant to see your bloodstream. Then they float around your body, and guess what? It causes inflammation. Well, inflammation then does what? Well, inflammation then sets off your genetics. So now, whatever you're predisposed to, well, you end up getting inflammation or an inflammatory reaction in that particular area. So for example, if you're more prone, because everyone in your family had thyroid issues, well, you may not then have joint issues, but you certainly may get inflammation of the thyroid. If you're prone to rheumatoid arthritis, like everyone in my family is, all four of my grandparents, both of my parents, me when I was 17 years old, well, then you're going to start to get pain. And for me, it's in these thumb joints right here. All right. So if I have an autoimmune reaction, it's there. When I was just a teenager, I was getting autoimmune reactions in my joints, in my fingers, and my left elbow. And nobody shared with me way back then that, oh, well, it's because you have all of these intestinal permeability based issues. But what happens is when you begin to resolve this, well, those things begin to then go away. Why? Because if you remove the inflammation, which is, again, still a symptom, then you don't have all these inflammatory based reactions. So well, look at it another way. If your immune cells have nothing to fight and go after, then there's no immune reaction. And if there's no immune reaction, there's no exaggeration because it's going after something, well, then there's no autoimmune reaction, right? So there's no inflammation if there's no immune reaction. And we don't have to have an immune reaction if we're not spilling proteins or heavy metals or viral particles or amino acids or bacteria or yeast or mold into our bloodstream. Okay, so I want you to think of this in a little bit different of a way. Now, this show, you're probably saying, is about gluten, though. Why are you talking about all this when you're talking about gluten? Well, because gluten actually sets off an inflammatory reaction in our digestive system. Now, I want to qualify this. It happens to a minor degree in some people and a major degree to people who have something like celiac disease. But it affects every single human. And I'm going to give you some quotes in just a moment from the leading authority and doctor on this, which I would love to share with you. The doctor's name is Dr. Alessio Fasano, used to work at the University of Maryland, and I believe is now at Harvard University. So if you're someone, though, I just want to qualify this, that is dealing with abdominal pain or bloating or gas, kind of bloating distension of the stomach, especially if it kind of gradually moves on through the day, water retention, weight gain, autoimmune issues, skin rashes, rosacea, headaches, brain fog, fatigue, joint pain fatigue, joint pain and muscle pain, if I haven't already mentioned that. This is something you want to look into because I've found, now this is not the cure-all, but those people who remove dairy and gluten automatically start to get a cessation in decrease in inflammation. Well, why would that be? Because of this protein molecule zonulin. Zonulin is synthesized in the intestines and the liver cells, and it regulates back and forth intestinal permeability. More or less, more zonulin produced, more leakiness in the gut. But then it's supposed to go back. But the problem is if you're always eating gluten, then what happens? It doesn't go back. It doesn't re-regulate that. So this is really interesting. I want to read you some research right here. So this is by Dr. Alessio Fasano, he's actually in the year 2000, I believe, was the one who figured out this protein molecule zonulin and how it works. So he writes, and this is by Dr. Fasano, no human being completely digests gluten. And gluten is a protein molecule within inside of wheat. So no human being completely digests gluten. And in a small percentage of us, that undigested gluten triggers the release of zonulin. Now, so and I'll go on to what it says, is every single person has a small inflammatory reaction to gluten or on the scale of a large inflammatory reaction to gluten. So basically every single person has a poor digestibility of gluten and it's on a large scale. Dr. Fasano also has spoken about on many other shows and podcasts, maybe I'll have him on the show, that different forms of wheat or different forms of grain-based products can have varying degrees of gluten. The more gluten, the more hybridized the wheat-based product, the worse it is for you. But if you think about it, just think about this for a moment. Many people have cereal or muffins or pastries in the morning. That's gluten, right? That's wheat and gluten. And then for lunch, they might have a sandwich or pizza or pasta or something like that, more gluten. And then at dinner, well, again, they might have pasta, or they might have, something fried with breadcrumbs. So people are effectively getting gluten many times, 3 times a day. And for any human being, it's just far too much, even in those people who have very little reaction. Let me go on. So we know that gliadin, the gliadin protein of wheat and related grains, such as rye or barley, or even some forms of corn, increase intestinal permeability. And while at the University of Maryland and now currently at Harvard, Dr. Alessio Fasano has shown that gliadin, again, the protein in wheat, initiates an increase in intestinal permeability, an effect mediated by the zonulin protein that causes disassembly of the tight junctions between the intestinal cells that normally provide a barrier against the entry of foreign materials into the intestinal wall and bloodstream. According to Dr. Fasano, the inappropriate production of increased amounts of zonulin creates a loss of barrier function, with subsequent inappropriate and uncontrolled antigen trafficking instigating an innate immune response by the submucosal immune compartment. If this process continues, an adaptive immune response is mounted, causing production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, such as TNF-alpha, that cause further opening of the paracellular pathway of the passage of antigens, creating a vicious cycle. In other words, the gliadin protein of wheat opens the floodgates of antigens that triggers inflammation and abnormal autoimmune responses. Wow, right? That was a lot of words, a lot of medical jargon. Let me see if I can take that back a bit for you. So what happens is this. When people eat wheat, they have a certain susceptibility. Let's say 1% susceptibility, 100% susceptibility, like with celiac, right? And people are going to fall on all sides of the spectrum. That's normal, right? Even when we see on food sensitivity tests, some people are mildly sensitive, some moderate, and some severe, okay? Or some not at all. So when we look at this, we understand. But what he goes on to say is this, is that the tight junction here in the intestines becomes a little bit more permeable. And what did he say? Well, all of a sudden now, antigens, which are basically pathogens, and your own immune cells go after antigens, something foreign in the body, right? Something in the body that wasn't meant to be in the bloodstream because it was meant to be in the intestinal tract and then get out of your body through a bowel movement is now in your bloodstream. That's what it comes down to. So what happens? Well, your adaptive immune system, what is that? What does adaptive immune system means? It means your immune cells that adapt to its current situation. So it will ramp up immune cell production. So your immune response will go higher and higher and higher the more antigens, or let's say bad guys, are moving from your intestines into your bloodstream. And then what happens? We get more inflammation from more of an immune reaction. And then when that immune reaction gets greater all around the intestines, what happens? Well, it creates even more intestinal permeability. So it's a vicious cycle. So now even more bacteria and potential parasites and potentially yeast and, again, dangerous lipopolysaccharides, which cause aging in the body, and protein particles begin to then free float into the body. So this is, again, like I said, quite dangerous. Let me go on just a bit here as well, because increased blood levels of zonulin have now been measured in people who are obese and have insulin resistance, diabetes, and all sorts of autoimmune issues such as celiac and MS, and then even other issues, chronic inflammatory issues such as PCOS, coronary artery disease, IBS, autism, etc. And we have to understand is that the connection has become very clear, because if we know that these are inflammatory-based diseases of the body, we know that there's an immune-based reaction. We can see that by opening up the intestines and allowing them to have foreign particles move into the bloodstream, we can see why the immune system would become aggravated. And it looks like it's attacking itself, but really not attacking itself. It's attacking molecules that may look similar to an antigen, that's called molecular mimicry, or actually going after the bacteria, which is lodging itself into the joints or cells or whatever it might be. So when your body starts to break down tissue, well, now we know that there's actually microbacteria that is actually in these cells that's detected by your immune system, and it's looking to cause what's called apoptosis with these cells, which is programmed cell death, because there are foreign particles inside of those cells or tissues. So we have to understand is the body's beautifully and intricately designed. There isn't really a messing up. There's always an underlying root cause. And gluten, although not the end-all be-all, is certainly part of this, because antibiotics can cause intestinal permeability. Chlorine in tap water can cause permeability. Certain types of medication can cause gut permeability. acid blocker medication cause intestinal permeability. Sucralose or certain types of fake sugar, artificial sweeteners can cause intestinal permeability. Certain types of oral contraceptives can cause intestinal permeability. Chronic stress can cause intestinal permeability. So it's not just gliadin, the main protein in wheat, but certainly that's a big part of it. And it goes on to say that, a lot of the issues here, and this is, I think, really, really important, is that people can begin to gain weight from these inflammatory-based reactions. That makes sense because the body becomes inflamed. There's more toxicity. The cortisol levels can increase. Thyroid can go down. Estrogen can increase as well. One more part that I wanted to share with you is that certain types of bacteria, E. coli, Campylobacter, and Pseudomonas, as well as others, can actually begin to increase and grow. And zonulin is actually triggered by a lot of these harmful bacteria. Now, again, these bacteria can grow with all the different things that I just stated before. The chlorine in the tap water, the fluoride in the tap water, the antibiotic use, the proton pump inhibitors, et cetera. All of those things can cause a lot of this bacteria to overgrow. And then, of course, we can simply take it in as well through contamination. Now, you can find these on a bacterium parasite stool test. That's a great lab to run. You can run it right at home. It will also test for H. pylori. You can find that over at equi.life. That's equi.life. But believe it or not, an overgrowth in this bacteria can trigger zonulin as well. So now gluten can cause inflammation. A lot of these as well are not good for allowing this bacteria to begin to overgrow. And now the bacteria begins to overgrow, and now we have more zonulin being released as well. So again, this is like so important to look at because I'm always talking about root cause imbalances on this podcast and in our private practice. And I just want people to know that there is always an underlying root cause. And sometimes a gluten sensitivity is a big part of that. Now, the nice thing is this, and Dr. Alessio Fasano said this as well, and he has a book called Gluten Freedom. So I'll link that up here today. I'll talk about it maybe a little bit more on the Friday review as well. But if you go to stephencabral.com/1908, I'll link up that book. But he has a little quote here too, saying that, the human body, if we're looking at just overall nutrition and diet, and I'll link up another podcast called The Foundation of All Diets, is that we can take in some meat. We can take in some flesh-based foods, but in general, we're eating a relatively small amount of animal-based products for the human body. And that when we used to do hunting and gathering, we would get an animal and it'd be shared though with the family or extended family as well. So that left us to eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, nuts and tubers like root vegetables, olives, olive oil, and some fish, crustaceans, whatever we can get. And all of those things though feed the microbiome and its bacteria to be fed in a synergistic standpoint. The problem is when we begin to take in a lot more wheat and gluten-based products, and I'll link up a show on gluten as well, like what are gluten-based products, then that can begin to disrupt our natural microbiome, right? This natural 28 feet of digestive tract, about 21 feet of a small intestine, about 5 to 6 feet of large intestine. And it begins to become disrupted. So the next time someone says, I don't really believe in this whole gluten-free thing, you have to understand it's not your job to convince them, but we do have to understand that gluten is not a health food for us, right? Wheat's not a health food. It doesn't mean that I don't enjoy a bowl of pasta and a little bit of bread once a week. And yes, it might create an inflammatory reaction, but the nice thing is if you're not having that every single day, then your body is able to deal with that to a far greater degree, and it doesn't set off this vicious cycle and this cascade. So I'm a big believer that you're still allowed to have some as long as you don't have celiac or you're not dealing with current autoimmune issues, which I'm not, then you're allowed to have some. It's just the problem is when we begin to have these gliadin-based foods on a daily basis, it really does add up. So I wanted to bring this to you today. Certainly I have a lot more to say on it, but I've met my time limit for the day. So I want to be respectful of your time. And what I'll do is I'll just link up a bunch of shows on going gluten-free, why going gluten-free is not necessarily healthy, because a lot of these gluten-free foods are not so healthy. So we'll link that up today, the foundation of all diets. And then we'll link up our whole digestive category as well. So hopefully this is helpful. Again, I'm always here. Just let me know what your questions are. are, I'm happy to answer those. Feel free to leave them in the comments on YouTube right below or on Instagram. And again, for all show notes and research, head on over to stephencabral.com/1908 for today's show notes. Take care, everyone. Have an amazing day, and feel free to pass this along to anyone else you believe it could serve. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Cabral Concept. Really appreciate your downloads, your subscribes, and your listens. And that's why before you go, I want to make sure you always know what we have going on, what's new, what's innovative over at equa.life. This is our online, our virtual, integrative health-based organization where we help people literally in 30 countries all over the world to get access to at-home lab testing as well as the absolute purest and best nutritional supplements and protocols. And this week, we have a debut of a brand new product based on your suggestions. You wanted to be able to get that same daily nutritional support powder in a low waste bag rather than the jars that we typically ship them in. We listened to you. It's taken us about 6 months to work with the right manufacturers on these. And now we are debuting those low waste daily nutritional supplement based bags. This is the same grade vanilla or chocolate based powder that contains all of your daily nutritional support. All of your vitamins, your minerals, your electrolytes, your detox factors, fiber, plus 15 grams of a plant-based protein. This is completely vegan for those that are looking to be on more of a plant-based or vegan-based diet. And it's a great way to supplement a whole food diet. It's the number one product that people use in our practice to maintain health and also to increase their health, vitality, energy, and much more. So right now we are offering you, whenever you purchase those it's this week, when you purchase the 2 bags, which is 1 month supply of the daily nutritional support, we're actually going to give you our brand new free glass canisters. These are glass canisters that you can stow away in your cabinet, kitchen cabinet, or keep right on your countertop like we do right at home. The glass canisters are a great sustainable way in order to be able to save all of your nutritional supplement, your daily nutritional support inside of that container, with a sustainable bamboo-based lid. Really nice, beautiful base design, $19.95 value, yours completely free this week while supplies last on those glass canisters. Head on over to equa.life for all the details. Thanks so much. Have an amazing day.